Hello, everybody. I'm Carolyn Waters, the Director and Head Librarian here at the New York Society Library. Welcome tonight. As we begin, we acknowledge that the library stands on traditional lands of the Lenape people and other indigenous peoples to whom we pay respect. If you are new to the library, we are the oldest library and cultural institution in New York City, founded in 1754. Today, we are a vibrant community of readers and writers and families. We hold many events that are open to the public, just like our wonderful program tonight. So I encourage you to get on our mailing list and see what's going on. And I hope that you'll join us either as a member or at another event in the future. And if you could silence your cell phones or anything that might make noise, it's always a good reminder. We are so pleased to have with us tonight Thomas Mallon to discuss his new collection of diaries, The Very Heart of It, with Alexandra Isles. Thomas Mallon's 11 books of fiction include Henry and Clara, Watergate, a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award, and most recently, Up with the Sun. His novel Fellow Travelers was adapted into an acclaimed opera and an award-winning Showtime television series. In his nonfiction, he has written about plagiarism, the Kennedy assassination, and 2 books of essays. His honors include Guggenheim and Rockefeller Fellowships, the National Book Critics Circle Citation for Reviewing, and the Purcell Prize, am I saying that right? The Purcell Prize of the American Academy of Arts and Letters for distinguished prose style. In 2012, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he is a professor emeritus of English at the George Washington University. Alexandra Isles has been a researcher and an assistant curator at New York's Museum of Radio and Television, now the Kennedy Center for Media. She has curated exhibits and screening series on the arts, drama, and children's programming. A research grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities launching her filmmaking career, and her history-based documentaries include Scandalize My Name, Stories from the Blacklist, The Power of Conscience, The Danish Resistance and Rescue of the Jews, and The Healing Gardens of New York. The Los Angeles Times says, Mallon's diaries capture the atmosphere of a city and community reeling from the AIDS crisis and the material optimism of Reagan-era America. His writing stands out for its honesty and authenticity, offering a vivid, personal chronicle of a transformative era. We have copies of the new book and other titles by Mr. Mallon available for sale by our friends from the corner bookstore out in the gallery. So I hope you will purchase a copy after the event. And I am now delighted to turn the floor over to our speakers.
Well, I'm just going to start with a few words about the book. I have a shelf at home, which is my Tom Mallon shelf, and it's quite filled. But this book, this is an extraordinary book, and I think this is going to go on my great books about New York, with Robert Caro and William White, and it stands alone that way because it really is. It's a wonderful history of New York. And so while we are here in this extraordinary library, I wanted to ask you about libraries, but first we had the pleasure when we were hiding in the stacks before we came in and found a huge shelf, a Tom Mallon shelf and a Mary McCarthy shelf for Tom. So for anybody that wants to take anything out of this library, it's quite a splendid, handsomely treated shelf right there under MA. So what I wanted to start by asking you as an incredible researcher and what libraries and archives have meant to you in your work.
Oh, I mean, everything. I mean, as much for fiction as for nonfiction. In some ways, I've had more fun in libraries researching historical fiction, than I had when I was actually writing scholarship and footnotable fiction. But no, it really they mean the world to me. I remember I wrote a dissertation, and I was kicking and screaming because I didn't want to be an academic, but I wrote a dissertation on one of the World War I poets that in London, whose papers were in Texas along with everybody else's. In those days, I mean, they had cornered the market on 20th century British literature. And the first thing I looked at was one of his diaries that he kept as a soldier during the war, during the Battle of the Somme, kept it illegally. Because if you got captured, we're not supposed to have a diary on you. And I opened it up in this air-conditioned room in 100-degree Boston July weather. And the first thing that happened when I opened the book were these dried wildflowers that he picked up from the battlefield on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, fell onto the table. And so it was just the vividness of things. And this all started, this book, when my friend Lucy Kale always refers to me as the archival doctor. And I mean, aside from diaries, I'm a very orderly person. And I had all of my papers and they were all accumulating, and it was really time to think about what I was going to do with them. And so organizing the papers and finding a home for them, it was a sort of big pandemic project. And so they are now in the Library of Congress, these papers, and they're about 250 Hollinger boxes, if you know what they are, and they, when I spoke there this summer, when this first came out, they had a little exhibit of the handwritten diaries that they now acquired. And it was really like being at your own wake. I mean, there's just walking past these tables and where you were under glass, these pictures, and just seeing all this. It was, and I have once, since they, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep doing that, aren't I? Okay. All right. It's coming from inside the house. A couple of times in the few years that they've had the papers, I've had to go back because somebody will call me up about something, or they're reprinting a book or something, and I have to find out, what was the state of the permissions for things I quoted. And I still have everything, even from 40 years ago, but I don't have it at home anymore. And so I feel it's, it's, there's an awful lot. A person who keeps diaries this voluminously is not somebody comfortable with the prospect of death. And such a person doesn't feel freaked out by the accumulation of all this paper. You just feel somehow that this is a displacement, There was a line at Gore Vidal, Jerry probably knows this one, where Franklin Roosevelt was apparently buried in Hyde Park without one side of the coffin. One side of the coffin was removed before he was there, and there are various theories as to this, and he had a horrible fear of fire, as you can imagine, being paralyzed. I mean, the only time Mrs. Roosevelt ever apparently burst into tears was when he proudly showed her how he could throw himself out of his wheelchair and drag himself along the ground if he needed to get out. And I think Vidal was asked about that story, and Vidal had a different theory as to why the side was off the coffin, and said, "Oh, I think he wanted to get back in circulation." And I think there's something of that about this mountain of paper being kept by somebody from.
Well, what about some of the treasures that you find in your research of books of other letters, diaries, information?
Well, just I was a very old, as a critic, a very old-fashioned belletrist, and the first book, or it was actually the second book, or the first book that anybody read, was a book called A Book of One's Own, which was about diaries, and this book covers those years when I was writing it, and I just read really indiscriminately, and I just wrote about books I liked, books I hated, books that I thought were weird or intriguing. And I then would devise these sort of bogus transitions from one writer to the next, and I organized them according to motive, why people kept diaries. And I think this one would wind up in the first chapter of the book that I wrote about diaries. That was the chroniclers, and those were the people who didn't write just about themselves, and God knows there's a lot of me in here, but nonetheless enjoyed writing about what was going on in the city, what was going on in literary life, gossip. There was and of course I did not practice this in my own diary, but in the people who really did that, who were really the great chronicle diarists, somebody like Boswell, any number that you could name, even to an extent Pepys, you learned more about them, what they were like when they were not writing about themselves. You learned more about them by aggregating their reactions to what was going on around them. That was how I came to know what were really the values, the passions of these people. But I never had any model when I wrote my own diaries.
Well, you had the draw of New York, and do you want to read something from
Sure.
that about it moving into New York, and that's from November 13th, 1983.
Here it is. I had been living for the past 4 years in a faculty apartment at Vassar, where I was an assistant professor and profoundly miserable. And I had nothing but nice emails and letters from my old Vassar students in the last year. I've really been astonished. Oh, I remember you. You were funny. I learned a lot, et cetera, et cetera. And I just remember these Vassar student evaluations, which always in the written part said things like, "You need new clothes." We get sick of the same sport coats day after day. Anyway, so I rented an apartment right across from the Chrysler Building, right near Grand Central, because I was still going to be able to commute up to Vassar. But it was leaving what was a very self-enclosed world. It was not a good career move in many respects. They were not happy, but I was going to do it. So I rented this apartment. November 13, moving my things from Poughkeepsie. What should have been an ordeal turned into an idol. Oliver, my Irish brother-in-law, arrived with his 2 Salvadoran helpers. One of them escaped on the floor of a truck and has been here only a month, and we loaded up in about an hour. Once in Manhattan, we double parked the truck and made dozens of trips up the stairs, and finally got the couch up 4 flights. I don't think I'll ever forget the twilight moment when I waved goodbye to them. We were all laughing, and our eyes kept darting from the Chrysler Building to Grand Central to Naciones Unidas, which was right down the street. And there we were, 3 different kinds of immigrants, each dreaming the different phases of the same dream.
And at the same time, you were losing the love of your life then, Tom Curley.
Yes, a very brief but one-sided but impassioned affair with Tom. Was that picture for you? Let's see. That's Tom Curley. And that's the apartment on 43rd Street. I was on the 4th floor, right next to St. Agnes's Church.
Yeah.
But Tom was, as you can see, a spectacularly handsome and also accomplished man. He was a PhD in classics from Princeton, and he had a postdoctoral fellowship at Johns Hopkins. And Tom got sick very early on in the AIDS epidemic. He was diagnosed with AIDS in 1983, and there was really nothing that they could do for you. And so you know, it was more the aftermath of a romance than a romance, but it was the heart of that, and in the summer of 1984, he was dying. He died in October of 1984, and I became very close to his mother, and was up at Columbia Presbyterian all the time, and these were the days when you practically had to wear a hazmat suit, for them to let you in the room and visit anyone. And one of the it's not a regret I have about the book. It really couldn't be otherwise. But you see Tom in he dominates the first 75 or 100 pages of the book, and you see him helpless, and you see him failing and having all kinds of dementia, all kinds of physical things. You don't see what he was only a year before that, and he had a kind of overwhelming magnetism, and so it, I never. I faithfully wrote all those entries day after day after day after day, but I never had a sense that I was trying to preserve history. More than anything else, I was just trying to it was one more way to keep sane. They're right in the dark.
Well, the constant fear is just this drumbeat that went on for years and years and years of AIDS for so many people.
Yes, and any diary that's kept regularly develops a series of narrative lines, like a long novel, and there are subplots, and there are main plots, and so forth. And one of the narrative lines in this book is whether or not to get tested for the AIDS virus. I had every reason to believe that I could have it. I mean, I've obviously been exposed to it, and but as late as 1987, people like Larry Kramer were saying, "Don't take the test. What good is it going to do you?" The medicine in those days, AZT, was for some people as poisonous as the disease, And why live? It was Larry Kramer's exact line: "Why live with a sword of Damocles over your head?" But I was always wondering and trying to figure out if I had this, how much time I had. And I made my calculations that way. No, don't start that second book, because if you get sick, you'll have two halves of two books, whereas if you don't start that and you stick with the other one, maybe you'll have enough time to finish it. And people did think that way in those days. And as well as going on living. One of the discussions I had with my editor at Knopf about this was, this is a big humper of a book. It's nearly 600 pages, and which was, 60,000 more words than they really would have wanted. And they, a chunk of this had been in the New Yorker a few years ago, and that was what led them to ask me, "Do you want to do a book of the diaries?" And I argued for the longer book for two reasons. I said, let me argue with you first as somebody who's lived the life that's chronicled there. One of the things that we did in that time was you kept on living. I can worry about anything. I loved my father when I was a little boy. He paid so much attention to me, whatever. But I remember one day he just looked at me in complete mystification and he said, "You worry about more things." And so something like this came along. I was at the top of the worry charts. But so was everybody else in my community, as they say. And I also remember just a tremendous fun times in the 1980s. And I was very driven about my career. And very much looking for romance, and it had its comic aspects, its striving aspects, its other kinds of disappointments. And I said, unless all that other stuff is in the book, but particularly literary life, which there's a lot of literary life in the book, which was very vibrant in those days, and much more social than publishing gets to be now. That was one argument that I made. And the other argument was, I said, can I argue to you as a student of diaries? Somebody who literally wrote a book about them. 500 plus pages of diaries read much faster than a 500-page novel. Just the very segmentation of them, it keeps you going rather fast. So they let me publish the book that I really wanted to. For that, I'm very grateful.
What you would pack into a day, I think other people that have read this book know the same thing. I mean, you're reading, you're writing, you're jogging 5 miles, you're going to restaurants, you're dancing at night. There's so much theater, I mean, everything, and friendships.
Yeah.
And the people are getting crushes on you and you're getting crushes and it's a busy time.
One of the blurbs is from Paul Rudnick, who gave his blurb, and he says, among the things that the book chronicles is his hectic love life. And I suppose it was, but I sort of sometimes she said, wow, I didn't really know that you got around them. And I said, well, I said, well, if you look at 2 pages, you'll see that sometimes, a week and a half goes by between those entries, so it looks like it's day after day after day after day. But it really, my roll was slower than you think. But I did go look for Mary's books in the stacks. Mary McCarthy was sort of, what a show Mary, a picture of her. She was my literary idol. That's 1982, and in the stacks, boy, to go from M.A. Mallon to M.C.C. McCarthy, it is a testament to the bounty of the Society Library, as well as to how well the Irish have done.
Yes.
You have a lot of mix to get here. But I mentioned Mary, and now, of course, I don't know why I did. I'm waiting for the piece of plaque to break off, and I don't remember. Yes, thank you very much. And she was asked at one point late in life, what's your assessment of yourself? And she said to the interviewer, not favorable. And going through this, one of the things since a lot of it is about literary life and work, I would say my evaluation of myself was B+ writer, A+ work. I worked hard. That much I would give myself.
Yeah, there's another piece that I'd love you to read, which is from 1988, and that is March 9th. That also is what's at your sort of core for being in New York and your future.
Oh, I know what this is.
So,
Yes.
This is the heart of it.
You have to understand that my first novel was a book called Arts and Science. It's a comedy at graduate school. I mean, why anyone would sign this up, I don't know. I mean, I'm fond of it in a way. It was sort of funny, but it was a comedy about agony at Harvard. It was sort of like an OCD version of Lucky Jim. And it sank without a trace, and it got some nice reviews, but the guy in the Times hated it, just hated it. And I had just gotten that news from my publisher, and I'd seen the advanced review, and the headline of the review was "Wonk Meets Snob." And anyway, I took a decision. I was either gonna pack it in. I was doing fine as a nonfiction writer. That book about diaries had done really well. I was reviewing everywhere. And Houghton Mifflin wanted me to be this belletristic writer. Okay, you wrote about diaries, now we'd like you to write this book about plagiarism, you know? And we were even gonna call it Not a Book of One's Own. To play in the diaries, but I wanted to write fiction. And this book, which they published, it just it had been strangled at birth. In the Times, March 9, an hour ago, I was in the Grand Central waiting room under Pegasus, the Zodiac ceilings, under Pegasus, taking a decision. I'm going to bet the farm, and I'm going to bet it on myself. I'm going to leave Vassar in June. I'm going to give everything I have to writing. For 6 months after leaving, I'm going to do nothing but write. I will finish the plagiarism book and have Aurora 7, my second novel, outlined down to the last scene. If I make no big money, have no windfall from paperback or movie rights in that time, good luck. I'll look for a job here in New York after New Year's, and it won't be a teaching job either. I spent another rotten day, and tonight I was out on Third Avenue, the tears beginning to break out again. And then I saw the Chrysler Building, its silver chevrons pointing upward, upward. I'm going to do this in the face of AIDS, financial worry, bourgeois pride, and my professorial status, complete unacquaintance with a life outside schools. I've had a bad, confidence-sapping week, and I'm going to respond to it by an act of faith in myself. If I fail, I fail. If I don't, look back on this night and read this page and say, this was a time he showed some character.
Yeah, the rest is history. So you were doing Aurora 7 at that time, which is how we met, actually.
Yes.
But Scott Carpenter is a name, it's an unlikely name that keeps throughout the book. And it's not just you know, writing about it, but he reaches out to you. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about
Yes,
that friendship.
Do we have Scott?
There is a picture of you and Scott that's in the book.
Yeah, I don't have it there, but anyway, Scott.
Yeah.
Scott Carpenter was one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts, and his capsule was named the Aurora 7, which became the title of my novel. And it was an incredibly suspenseful flight. He was lost for 55 minutes, at least to the general public. He landed 250 miles long, and there were 7,000 people in Grand Central looking up at the monitors, thinking, you know, Walter Cronkite, that we may have lost an astronaut. And it was a thrillingly suspenseful flight. And he looked like a movie star. His first wife, Reen, was an absolutely beautiful woman with a huge personality. Whenever the astronauts are at the White House, Ben Bradley spoke of Conversations with Kennedy like 3 times in the course of one party. Kennedy keeps saying, you know, Carpenter's wife is the one, isn't she? Carpenter's wife is the one. But I became good friends with Scott and with Green, his first wife. But with the exception of having many wives, which was very much part of the astronaut profile eventually, once they all had their early retirements, he was very different. He was very soft-spoken, very wondrous about things. One of the reasons he got in trouble in space is that he was using his fuel, the fuel with which you pitch and yaw the capsule. He was using it to get a better look at the stars, and he was supposed to be saving all of that fuel for re-entry, you know. And as Tom Wolfe says in the right stuff, Carpenter had a touch of the poet about him. And Scott lived in New York for a while, and I would see him. And he, you know, I'd want to talk about some famous bit of space history or some famous characters he met, whatever. And he would, you know, ask me if I could explain to him this poem that he'd seen in the New Yorker that week. You know, that was definitely not the astronaut profile. And he was, it was very special knowing him. And he lived until 2013. And so very close to his daughter and son-in-law. But in those days, Alexandra worked at what was then the Museum of Broadcasting, now the Paley Center. And I wanted to find all of the old kinescope coverage of Carpenter's flight. Those were the days when flights were covered round the clock on television. And it was rotting in the CBS offices on 57th Street. And to transfer it to the latest, never to be surpassed technology, VHS, would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and I just didn't have it. And so I met Alexandra, and I discussed my problem with her, and she said, she told me about the kind of letter to write, asking arguing with the museum to acquire this. And I don't even know if you remember this, but you said emphasize the press history aspect of this, not the space history of it, because after Carpenter was recovered, it turned out that NASA knew he was still alive because they had a heartbeat telemetry, but they were so afraid he might be found disoriented in his capsule, whatever, that they didn't tell that to the public. And so people who covered space, like Cronkite, talked about this as a sort of the first big public relations disaster of the space program. And that was the argument we made, that it was significant to the history of broadcasting on space, and they transferred all the tapes. I would watch them by the hour.
Yeah, and didn't you say that even the commercials were in
The commercials were there, which were priceless. I mean, in writing historical fiction, and the newspaper has always been my chief tool, and you frequently learn more from the ads and something that's way off the front
the
pages.
flowers that fill out.
Yeah. There's sort of the scrapbook aspect of the newspaper.
So then, well, let's say about this time you met Bill.
Bill, yes, it's been my partner for 36 years. And as we live in Washington, and he now says to people, oh yes, I come in on page 297. And I met Bill, and we do have a picture of Bill with.
Oh, yes, there are several pictures of Bill.
With
But there's
my click.
younger Bill with Jean Moore, yeah.
Where is it? Sorry, thank you. Okay. Feel like a nun. You don't remember those clickers, the ones that you have. Okay. That's Bill on the left with Jean Moore. Jean Moore was the design director for Tiffany, and Bill often did these very whimsical, ingenious window displays for Tiffany. They would take months for him to do. He did historical brides dressed up. The dresses were all made out of paper doilies. He did the Christmas windows one year, whatever. So Jean was kind of his mentor, and he was a real kind of New York character, a very good friend of Alexandra's mother, and very cantankerous. I mean, to this day, I say to Bill things like, you're starting to sound like Jean. Because Jean was mentally so active, but his body was giving out on him. He was terribly arthritic and was in pain all the time, and he couldn't draw as easily, and hated getting old, and that extended to old people. I mean, Bill was once on the crosstown bus with him, and this very, very old lady was trying to get on the bus, struggling, and the driver was helping her on, and people were making sure she had a seat, whatever. And she didn't know who this woman was, but she sat there going, here she comes. Here she comes. Because she just represented age to him. And but anyway, I met Bill in 1989, and I misspelled his last name in the entry where I met him. It was one of the only misspellings I left on the page. And we led a very different life. And we this book is the first 5 years of it, and but I was not out of the shadow of AIDS yet, because Bill was HIV positive, and so we dealt with Bill's medications. We dealt with Bill's counts, the T cell count, you know. Again, and these were the years really up until about 96 where there was very little they could give you. He had a top-notch doctor, but there was only so much that they could do. And that was the drama of it. And I finally felt secure enough in my own life to finally have the test in 1990. And I was negative after all of those years. And as many people turned out to be. I mean, I had, you know, a friend in New York who was in the theater, who said to me, I have done everything known to man at least twice. And much more than that. And he was negative, and he said, why are they studying me? I don't understand, you know, which was a damn good question when you think about it. And the diaries in the years just after this are very much concentrated, a lot of them, you know. Again, life went on, but Bill was clearly going in the wrong direction. And then 1986, what people still call the cocktail came in, and he instantly responded, and he turned 80 in April. So you know, nobody was supposed to get to 80, and so you know, there was that, and we were very, very, very lucky, and many people we knew were not lucky, and but there was something existential, a heightened existentiality, you know, to life, really through all of those years, and but it's interesting to have the records, and you know, when I was transcribing, another pandemic project, we scanned about 145 volumes of these diaries. He had a scanner on his printer, I had a scanner on my printer, and we would each do a diary a day during the pandemic. And it was off the scans that I put the book together, because the handwritten diaries went to the Library of Congress in 2021. And you know, so I did that New Yorker piece, which covered years before I met Bill. That stopped in 88. But then I wanted to bring this forward to into about 94. My struggles as a fiction writer, I thought I'm going to end it when they finally ended, and I sort of had traction as a fiction writer. I mean, it would have been very arbitrary where it ended in any case. But you know, I didn't show him a word of this until I had a manuscript that I was ready to submit to Knopf. And I said, if you don't want me to publish it, if you want me to cut out anything you want me to cut out, I'll cut out. If you don't, you know, I can publish half the book. In some ways, they may be happier. If it goes up to 1989, I'll be under my word limit, you know. But you have absolute veto power, you know, on this. And he came in my study after, and we did not talk about it while he was reading. And he came in my study and he said, publish the whole thing, publish it as is. It was how we lived. And you know, with nothing to be ashamed of, you know, it was, you know, everybody's faced with things in their lives that they just have to stick it out for. And so he, you know, he was grand about that. I mean, Bill made my life as a writer possible. I mean, Bill has no interest in politics. Half of my books have been about politics in one way or another. The last novel that I wrote was a book called Up with the Sun, which was about a real life murder of an actor that took place 2 blocks away on 77th Street between 5th and Madison. And you know, Bill's reaction was, read the messages. Thank God, not one goddamn congressman or senator. Finally, a vote with Dolores Gray. But Bill, one of the things I think this interesting. He said to me early on, I want to make a home for you. And that was, I flinched when he said that, because that was what I suppose academics would call internalized homophobia, my own about myself. I just couldn't picture us, that sort of domesticity. And and yet he was so made for that. He was so creative and did everything beautifully and whatever. And I really warmed up to it very quickly. I haven't cooked dinner in 35 years. The household runs like a purring Cadillac. And I stay at my desk till 6:30. Didn't go back to my desk until 9 o'clock. And what I didn't realize, aside from everything else, that he was bringing to my life, I was like the gay version of a room of one's own. 500 pounds a year, a room of one's own. And this was, he just made my life as a writer so easy. Most books unlike this, I show him, a chapter at a time, whatever. And I mean, if you're the partner or spouse of a writer, the best thing to do if you read the chapter is just say one word, just say sublime. Or as a macro critic, we'll sometimes say, I don't get it, which is just not like, take a little.
Well, I think what's very moving when you meet him and the love starts is for both of you, the concern for each other, the things that you do for you both are taking care of each other, which is it's very moving. And I wondered whether the voice changed at all in the entries. Just as you were,
I think it probably, the last 5 years is less bitchy than the ones before, although it's pretty bitchy, the book. I mean, it's very sharp-tongued and judgmental, and I try to explain that away in the preface a little bit by saying, some of these judgments can be harsh, and they're, the point was immediacy, not not a reasoned, rounded, fair look at somebody. But I do think it probably made me gentler. I know Bill made me a better son with my mother. I mean, I love my mother. She was extremely pretty and had a fizzy, funny personality, but she exasperated me a lot of the time because she there was a slightly, to me, she was just fizzy more than she was. Like, I couldn't talk to her about certain things.
Bill would know when it was her birthday.
Bill remembered her birthday before I did. She loved Bill. And Bill would arrange these visits into New York, and she'd stay over with us, and we would go to the theater and whatever. And he said, just you listen to me, whatever. That's what she's craving. She was a widow and she's quite lonely and whatever. And he did. The three of us were very much a family for a number of years. And
Tom's mother also.
Tom's mother, Louise, was we got a picture. This is that's me with the Diaries book in Scribner's window in 1985, not really believing that. And there's my friend Fran, who's in the audience. Fran Kiernan was my editor for a while. And that's outside of, this is me at GQ, where I was laughing all the time. That's me with Art Cooper, my boss. But this is the last picture that's actually in the book. And that's Tom Curley's mother on the left, Louise, who lived to be 93. And that's me in the middle, and that's Bill on the right. And that picture was taken, I think, in 2007, which was more than 20 years after the horrible summer of Tom's illness and death. And we had Thanksgiving every year with Louise and her family. And you know, it was such a harrowing thing for her. And in the years before I met Bill, I mean, Louise and I were often at dinner. We went to the theater. We had a few drinks together, and it was quite solitary. She had very much a family. She had another son and a wonderful daughter-in-law, and was becoming a grandmother or whatever. But you know, and we would talk a lot about Tom and whatever. And but when Bill came on the scene, she was very, very happy for me. And so Bill was a part of that as well.
So while we're on a happy moment, what do you want to be the happiest moment of all, which is August 24th, 19. Yes.
Yes, I mean, this is, like I said, I was struggling as a fiction writer, and I did have a second novel, which did better than the first, but it was still not anything that was going to make Hope Mifflin hope to have me on their fiction list. And I think they were hoping that I had gotten it out of my system. But I hadn't gotten it out of my system, and I had one more chance, thanks to Frank Kieran, who signed the book up, with the terrible title. It was a tentative title, but I had on the contract, I had the terrible title, Our American Cousins. But this was a novel that became called Henry and Clara, which was about the couple in the balcony with the Lincolns. And I, in Hollywood parlance, needed a hit if I was going to keep writing fiction. And I was with my GQ pals, Lisa Hendricks, Lucy Kalin. We were up at a retreat at Art Cooper, the editor's house. Art is in the picture just before that. This is at a party at the Lion's Head for GQ, for a fiction contest, in fact. And Art, you know, would have these retreats which were wretched exercise. I'm a Condé Nast was a wash in money, you know, in those days. And they would, you know, but the most famous thing I remember him saying, and it's not in the book, sometimes these things that you have told, stories you told a million times, whatever, when I went back to the diaries, where's that? Where's that? He just forgot to write it down, you know, when you made the entry. And I remember one day during these retreats, he said, he was lecturing the editors, he said, what you must never forget is that our readers have terrible values. and the message was, you have to edit accordingly. You have to assign, you know, acquire accordingly. But there was a phone call from the New Yorker saying, is Tom Mallon there? We were tracking him down. We need to photograph him for the New Yorker, which still in 1994 sounded very funny. Photos in the New Yorker, they had just started to put them in, you know, Tina would slip in one or two at a time. And so I thought, they wouldn't take my picture if it was bad, would they? And, you know, so I back to New York, had the photograph taken, and I awaited the review. And it was John Updike. August 24, 1994. Rabbit is rhapsodic. Mary, my agent, called this afternoon upon receiving a fax at the mechanicals of Updike's review. The ads aren't even on the pages. She called in a favor over at the New Yorker, and the person who sent them to her could lose her job. It's 5 pages long. And not only does it call Henry and Clara amazing, ingenious, deeply felt, moving, poignant, and quite a number of other things, I could go on, but he describes it as my breakout book. He went back to everything, A Book of One's Own, Stolen Words, and both other novels, which he says, quote, for all their wit and compass, were rather bloodless, unquote. He does say Aurora was shimmering and gleaming. Of course I know what he means, but the idea of him writing a fat whole paragraph on arts and sciences If I'd known he was up in Beverly Farms this past month, rereading all my books, I'd have died of fright. But that's what he was doing, and that's what led him to the last two sentences, which made Mary and me cry. He has shown himself to be, at the age of 43, one of the most interesting American novelists at work. Sometimes the long way round is the only way home. After this review, no one will ever think of me as primarily a nonfiction writer again. Breakout book, I feel as if I've been shot from a cannon.
And there's more fiction to come.
A little more. I'm revising. I'm back to the Civil War. It's a long novel called The Late Unpleasantness, which was a Southern euphemism for the Civil War after the war, and it's a big novel. So it's the kind of novel when I was growing up that Time magazine used to call sprawling. And I need to make it a little less sprawling. And then see where to go. But maybe it's because Jerry is in the audience. I keep coming back to Fidel, and I think it was a story wasn't a story. He, when he was just about the age I am now, I'll be 74 at the end of the year. He was, I think, 75, and he called me up in Connecticut one day. I used to edit him in GQ. This was several years after that. And he said, well, did you get the novel? He had just mailed me his novel. And I said, yes, thank you, Gord. And have you read it? Well, no, not yet. Who does that? But the answer is valid. I said, well, this will be the last one. And I said, oh, surely not, Gord. Why would you stop? He said, don't get to the end of a chapter, don't remember how it began. So, not quite at that point. Also not drinking a quart of scotch a day. But a novel is really an engineering project. You have to keep all the plot lines running, keep them clean, continuity issues, whatever. One of the things about writing diaries is it's phenomenally easy. It's just a couple of vignettes per day. I think it's good for a novelist. I think I had started my writing life as an essayist and a reviewer more than as a novelist, and narrative came to me slowly. I was used to having a lot of time to circle a subject and to consider it rather than to get on with the story. And I think diary writing has to be some help to that. But it's a very peppy little genre compared to these novels. Most of my novels have been fairly long. Historical fiction tends to be readers want it to be a bit blousy and costumed and so forth. And so yes, there's at least one to go.
What are there some characters in your novels that you still love, that you just love them when you were writing?
Yes, and it's usually minor ones that you think are going to be minor that sort of wind up running away with the book. The Old Man and Dewey Defeats Truman, who's named Horace Sinclair, and Alice Roosevelt Longworth sort of ran away with the Watergate novel. She would run away with, I think, anybody's novel. Yeah, some of them you're fonder of than others, but the form, you have to have empathy. I don't think you can't be a novelist without empathy for every character, certainly every character whose point of view you're going to use. That even has to extend itself to John Wilkes Booth. If you're writing, about the Lincoln assassination, you have to somehow be able to occupy that space.
Didn't you do some research on him?
Yes, I was starting out because I was not Houghton Mifflin's favorite novelist, I was trying to write a biography of John Wilkes Booth. There hadn't been one in about 60 years, but I discovered one was in the works, and I decided that's what the traffic would bear. But I kept coming across this story about the couple in the balcony. It was literally a footnote in most books about the assassination. But one of the things about the diaries too is that characters you'd sort of forgotten or hadn't thought about in years, whatever, that you remember so fondly. People like Frida Garbes was one of my writers at GQ, hilarious woman, really witty, self-taught. She was at that party, I remember. And Carl Furstenberg, my German boyfriend for several months after Tom Curley died, who was very funny, completely on to me, could not have been less interested in writing or anything like that. Always called me Barney because when we met in a bar, he misheard Mallon in this noisy bar as Miller. And there was a television comedy called Barney Miller. So he used to call me Barney. There are entries in here where I had just forgotten these things about Carl, who made life fun, and I so needed fun in 1985. And we're on the second date, and of course we're in bed. It's gay men, for God's sake. And it was freezing in that little walk-up apartment. And Carl said, we put some of your books in pot and set on fire. And my response to that was, oh, a little early for you to be imposing your national customs on. You hadn't thought about it 40 years or more, but they were still there.
Yeah.
There was the whole preservation aspect of that. Yes, they are similar to people, to characters in fiction, once they're on the page.
Probably there time for questions, but there's one thing I just would like to, in these strange times, two people I think are very important during this period that are not in the book, but maybe you'd just like to talk about Dr. Fauci and Dr. King.
Well, Dr. Fauci certainly is the most maligned person in public life, I think, in large segments of the country today, which I think is absolutely scandalous. Although I think we all saw last week during certain hearings somebody who's really deserving of maligning. My favorite times somebody described his complexion as medium rare. But Dr. Fauci, I don't know if it's mentioned in the book, but he certainly knew Bill's doctor, Jeff Green. And Dr. Fauci helped a lot of people get through those years, not so much because he was presenting them with a scientific advance, but he was listening to them. He was listening to people about their lives. He was listening to people about what the first efforts at medication were doing for them. And I think he was, a really a great man. And the politics, and my politics, I was always much more conservative than my writer friends, certainly. And I mean, I was very much in favor of Reagan's approach to the Cold War. And there's an entry here in 1984. My hand is like, I want to vote for Reagan because I knew that the evil empire speech, somebody was finally saying it. And within 5 years, the Berlin Wall would be down, the Soviet Union would be gone in about 7. And I cannot bring myself to vote for him because all of my inclinations in terms of something like liberty and foreign policy were conservative in that sense, but you had to swallow all the rest of it. The moral majority in those days, and Reagan was tremendously inattentive to AIDS. I wrote a large part of my novel about the Reagan years called Finale, deals with a character who was sort of like me, torn about those things. But the political leaders of the 80s and I always liked politics, followed it intently. They were bigger and better in so many ways. Nothing is like what we have now. Even the Reagan administration, whose record on AIDS was shameful. Even the Reagan administration had Dr. Koop as the Surgeon General, who was very conservative, was put in the position mostly because of his anti-abortion views. But he had to testify before Congress about AIDS, and they, in the administration, they did not want him to say anything except abstinence as a way to combat AIDS. And he absolutely refused to do it. And he said the most effective way to prevent transmission of the virus is the use of a condom. And he repeated it. And he caught hell from people back in the administration. It's as you can tell, I inherited my mother's tendency to talk constantly. I am speechless several times a day. It cannot get darker than it is now, although it's going to. And I long for the people who were in public life back then, because they actually, most of them, whether you liked them or not, whether it was Margaret Thatcher, whether it was Ronald Reagan, whether it was Ed Koch, whether it was Mario Cuomo, whatever, whether you liked them or not, they actually were in office in part because they actually believed in something. They actually had a genuine ideology as opposed to this insane narcissism that is choking us. And I never thought of this book when I put it together as being nostalgic, but on some level, yes. But particularly where some aspects of public health were concerned.
Do you want to open some?
Yeah, if you'd like to take.
Yes, I
something from me.
think Gabby.
Oh, no, do the R, and I don't know what the.
Can you run us through the rest of it?
Oh, I think that's about it.
Oh, that's it.
Most of them. Do you have the moment, Sarah?
What do I have to?
He said, can we run through the
Oh,
photos?
yeah.
There's about
So let's, yeah.
there's about I think 18 pages of photos in the book, which is again very generous of Knopf to have done. But yeah, I sort of tell the whole story. That's me and Mary McCarthy, who was really, I would not have become a writer without Mary. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on her, and she blurbed my first books, and she was in some respects more terrifying than Gore Vidal, but not to me. She was always very, very, I dare say almost maternal. That was my first apartment. It's still there. I don't know how, since Third Avenue is all high rises now, but the landlord told me one time that, well, the water table blips up underneath that corner of Manhattan, and it makes high-rise construction infeasible. Who knows? In New York, people say anything. But that was that's Tom That's Tom. He would be dead in 15 months from that picture. That's how quickly AIDS tore through the people who had it in those days. That's me wishing it were a novel instead of a book of nonfiction, Scrivener's Window, but delighted to be there. It was taken by my old friend Anne Embry from Vassar. Bill and Jean, as I mentioned before. Me and Fran. I don't know, you look as if you're editing me, but I think we're, or else we're chopping vegetables. Because that's Sag Harbor, I know. That's me at GQ laughing, which we do all the time. As is, I think the next picture is, yes, that's me and Art Cooper, my boss, that's Frank Gifford, the football player. Behind him at the party. There's Lisa way in the back. And that's Marty Beiser, who has passed away. He's the man behind the stack of plates. He was the man who hired me to work at the magazine, which was so good for me in so many ways. Me and Bill and Louise. And yeah, there's anything on the thumb drive.
No.
Everybody.
But that was the one
Oh,
we
I'm sorry.
added on the thumb drive.
Anyway, it's somewhere, don't worry about it, Sarah. There are lots of other pictures in the book. And it's really good when you get to select the
You have
pictures.
to buy the books.
Yeah.
You select the pictures of yourself because if you don't like the picture, just don't use it.
Dixie Carter, we went to Dixie Carter.
Dixie Carter was she was a sitcom actress, but she was also a cabaret performer. And she used to be at the Cafe Carlisle a lot. And Bill and I used to go there every April. And she was a kind of talisman, going to see her at the Carlisle. We went to Bill, he took me places that I never would have gone myself. I mean, we became tremendous. I was tremendous devotee of Charles Pierce, who was a female impersonator, although he preferred the term male actress. And he had a very campy show. He'd been performing since the 50s, and he did all the great giant film stars. Betty Davis, Joan Crawford. He was screamingly funny. It wasn't just the impersonations and stuff. The material was so funny, and he would be doing Marie Antoinette and saying, "Oh, Mama, I shall be Queen of France," and then he would go, clump, and then he'd be doing this, and you had to be old enough, and you had to. And he would just still have the Marie Antoinette costume, and you go, "I told her not to go." It's Jack Benny. He's doing Jack Benny here. And anyway, we would go down and see Charles whenever he was performing at the ballroom. And I used to write, there used to be these things, maybe they still do it, the New York Times Magazine at the end of the year, the lives they lived, which I always thought was very leaden and dead. Remember the lives they lived. But and I would used to do them, and he would say, "Oh yes, let's find a dead astronaut for Tom, or a dead senator, or whatever." And I used to I called up a few months before Christmas the year, and they said, "Oh, you want to do somebody for the issue?" I said, "Yes, I want to do Charles Pierce." And so it was a picture of Charles Pierce dressed up as Carmen Miranda, and I wrote a little thing, and that was sort of the Bill was very responsible for the gaying of me in a lot of ways, and we used to have that clip in our bathroom for maybe. Anybody? Yes.
Supposedly Charles Pierce, who's the head of the head of the English department of that.
Oh, it was my boss. That's her, and he pronounced it Peirce, Charles Peirce.
Okay.
And was Charles Peirce. There was the late 19th century philosopher Charles Peirce, and then there was Charles Peirce. So yes, it is a big because there are references to Charlie Peirce in the book, because I was teaching in this department, professor, but yes, very different. Very different, in fact. Yes.
I really enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed it. It was a great memory. But looking back, is there anything you feel like that you wish that you missed or that you didn't capture, do you think, like looking back? Or did you, that was your truth?
Well, it's funny because I'm somebody who's always rebelled against that phrase, my truth. I believe in the truth. I sort of don't, I wouldn't want anybody on a jury if I were the defendant, who believed in, my truth. I mean, their reality happens one way. And, but needless to say, you're right. It's my truth in the sense that it's my completely biased and blinkered view of what went on. And there were large parts of life that I missed because, I just wasn't drawn to them, or I just wasn't willing to give them the time. I don't, it's like standard deathbed fare or lore for people to say, well, they say nobody ever wished they spent more time working. And they're only good. What you're supposed to say is, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. No, I'm happy I worked as hard as I did. I wish I had a broader range of culture. Mostly I just read my eyeballs out. I did go to the ballet often. With Bill, I went to the theater much more often than I had done before. But there were many things, there are many instances in the book where you could read it, aside from my hectic romantic life, as Paul Rednick would say, you would say, well, why are you living in New York? You might as well be living in, Indianapolis, because you're not taking advantage of everything. And I mean, there's a lot of New York in the book, but I think, I just, mostly you just have the childish kind of fairy tale wish that you had known certain things in advance. I wish I hadn't spent so much time worrying, not just about HIV, AIDS, whatever, about everything, about some minor setback, minor career setback, minor romantic setback, minor something. And I wish I hadn't quite so often just pummeled myself into the ground over it. I do think that, like I said, the diaries can be quite bitchy, sometimes funny, sometimes not. And you're always having things your way in the diary. It's always your point of view. But I also realized that I was not so much on the page, but the page still brought it back to me. I was very hard on myself in a lot of ways. I fretted, I felt, I could feel guilty over anything just as I could worry over anything. And I wish I'd let up on myself a little bit. But so many things I miss, and most of all, I miss the people who are gone too soon. There are a lot of them in the book.